If you hate coloring hair because you can't figure out what colors to use or how hair even works, then you've come to the right video. Welcome to our second part of our hair shading tutorial where I show you how to shade hair. In part 1, we covered the basics of rendering hair. In part 2, I'll show you how to color hair. And in part 3, we'll go over how to render different hair textures. Now let's get started with part 2. So the really interesting thing about color is that color actually doesn't really matter that much. If I wanted to, I could change this into any color and this will work. And I'll show you real quick. I'm just going to press Command U to pull up my hue and saturation slider, and I'm going to push the hue into different shades. Now, pretend that you didn't see that this was blonde or ginger or whatever. Just look at the colors. The colors work well. And the reason is because color problems are actually value problems. What that means is if your hair cannot read in a plain black and white or grayscale view, your colors won't work that much. So what that means is it's more important to make sure that your hair strands read well, right? We have a clear, base tone, we have a clear shadow side, we have a clear highlight side. And if we don't see that as much, it's not going to read as well and the colors won't work. So learn to see colors in black and white. And I'll show you what I mean when I get into choosing colors for these hair strands. Let's get started with coloring different hair strands with different colors. And we're going to start off with the very natural hair tones like blonde, ginger, brown, and black. And I'm going to show you how I choose my colors. One of the things that I really recommend is think first, what's my value? How light or dark is my hair? Light/darkness. Because that's going to determine your local value, which means your natural lightness or darkness of your hair strand. And this is thinking about grayscale first, because that is what's going to make your image a lot more clear. Then the next thing I think about is, okay, am I going to choose a warm or cool color? And then third is color relationships with the shadows. Now I know that this may seem a little bit confusing, but don't worry, I will walk you through everything that I have here. And while I am doing this, I'm also using the 4 value system that we talked about in part 1. And a 4 value system is I'm organizing my painting into 4 specific values. I have my highlight, I have my base tone, or my mid-tone, whatever base it is, base, shadow, and darker darks. I'll just put DD. Why not? So if I have all these components, I can apply color. So let's get started with blonde. So here I have a value scale with 0 being white and 10 being pure black. And here in between are different shades of gray, going from light gray to very, very dark gray. And if you hear me say things like 10% gray or 60% gray, I'm basically referring to how light or how dark that gray is. So 10%, let's just pretend that this is like 10, 20, 30, 40. 10 being a very light gray and 60% being kind of like a much darker gray that's, past the midpoint. So since we're working with color, we have to understand that color problems are value problems, meaning if you don't know how values and how light or dark a certain thing is, you won't really be able to guess the color that much. Blonde hair will range between values 1 and 3. This one being kind of like a platinum blonde, this one being kind of like your usual blonde tone, and this one kind of being like a darker blonde, and maybe 4 if we want to stretch it a little bit more. So you'll notice that anything beyond this point will not be blonde anymore, because blonde is a physically much lighter hair color and will not get super dark. So I'd say that values 1 to 3 will be blonde. Ginger is probably going to be around 4 to 6 because it's darker, just a bit darker than blonde, and it's getting close to brown. Now, of course, there's going to be different shades of brown. You could have a light brown, dark brown, whatever, but I'd say around 6 to maybe 8 would be like a brown. And then black, of course, will be in the lower areas right here. Now, the interesting thing about color is that if you use pure black or pure white, you actually won't really get color. And I'll show you really quick what I mean. I'm going to press Command B, and this is color balance, and I'm going to push the hues in different areas right here. Now, this could be whatever color that you choose, but notice that only the grayscale has color, and that is because white doesn't actually have any color and black absorbs all color. So that's why you won't see any color if you use pure white or pure black, but you will see color if things are in grayscale. So that is the very basics of how to use a value scale and how to tell, what category or what values certain hair colors are. Anyways, let's get to actually drawing some of these hair strands, because enough about theory, we gotta apply it, right? So here I'm going to be drawing a hair strand. I'm just going to figure out the gesture and all that good stuff, and then we're going to duplicate it multiple times. Now the next step is to add in the base colors, and here I just filled everything in gray just as a mask, and now I'm going to add in the colors. So for blonde, I am going to choose more of a yellower blonde, more like a warm yellow blonde, I should say. And the reason why I say warmer is because I think that just personally looks prettier to me. You can definitely go for more of a cooler tone or a cooler blonde, which means more towards yellow and a little bit more towards gray. And you can definitely use this type of blonde as well. Works totally fine as long as the values work. You'll notice that if I turn my colors into black and white, the values didn't really change all that much. It's still pretty light, and that's where I want to be. For ginger, I'm going to go more towards orange, maybe a little bit more towards a reddish orange, because that's kind of the color of my choice. And I'm going to go a little bit more saturated, and I'm going to make this a little bit darker. So this is probably my second choice. Now I may want this to be a little bit more on the reddish side, so I'm going to change that instead. And if I turn this black and white, you can see that's physically darker now. So that's kind of the whole grayscale thing that I was talking about earlier, right? You want to see things in grayscale as well as color. Remember, color doesn't really matter. It's more about, can you see that if this is a physically darker piece of hair? Now for my brown hair, I'm going to basically just remain in the orange section, but I'm just going to make it darker. I like to say that brown hair is just orange hair, or ginger hair just darker. So that's what I'm going to use. This might be a little bit too dark for me, so I might go a little bit lighter. And I think that's good in terms of saturations. Let's turn this black and white again. You can see that it's definitely gotten a lot darker than the ginger hair this time. And then for black hair, I can choose if I want my black hair to be more of like a jet black or a warm black. And for me personally, I really like a jet black or just like a cooler black. Now, because black hair is a lot more silhouette based, it really doesn't matter like how you want to put the colors in. You can make it a little bit more purplish tinted like this. You can make it more, violet. Either way, it just reads as black. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to go for more of like a cooler bluish black, if that makes sense. And you can see here that I made this much darker. You'll see on the grayscale on the side, it's actually a lot more towards black here. And now I'm going to turn this black and white. You can see this is more in the 70 to 80% gray range. Now let's put in the shadows. For the blonde hair strand, I'm going to choose a slightly warmer shadow, which means a little bit more towards orange. I like to see some nice color contrast between the base and the shadow color. This is a concept called warm light cool shadow, or cool light warm shadow, whichever you want to do it, which basically means you're changing the color temperature between the lit side and the shadow side. So my base color was this more of like this yellow orange that's not super saturated, and so for my shadows, I'm going to contrast that by making some areas a little bit more saturated in the shadow side and pushing it more towards orange. So we see this nice color shift. So I'm going to do the same thing for the ginger strand. I actually moved my shadow color more towards red this time, so we see some nice contrast in the temperature. You'll notice that I don't move my lights and shadows up and down. That is basically adding black. And you can see here that in this example, this looks a little bit too dead looking. It just doesn't look as pretty as this red hue right here. And that is because black does two things. It desaturates and also makes things darker. So that's why I really recommend just changing the hue of your shadows or highlights. And just that tip alone helped me so much in choosing colors. So you'll notice that for my highlights, I chose a much more yellower color in comparison to the orange. So we see some nice, interesting dynamic temperature change. And I used to really struggle with choosing colors because I'll be like, yeah, but like what color goes well with black, or what color goes well with this orange, or whatever that I'm doing, and I'll just get overwhelmed until I watched a YouTube video by Li Xinyin, and I learned that it's not about what specific colors fits with what. It's more important to think, is this color warmer or cooler in comparison to the color I put down first? So I like to actually think of it as like a pattern, like cool, warm, cool, or warm, cool, warm, or whatever it is. So basically what that means is if I put a warm base color down, I'm going to put a cooler shadow. And for highlights, I can look back at my base color and be like, okay, do I want my highlight color to be warmer or cooler than that? And so that's kind of the decisions that I make. So you'll see that the base color for my brown hair is quite orangish red, it's quite dark. My shadows are even darker and more towards red, but my highlights, I decided to go for more of a yellower highlight because I like the contrast. But really, if I wanted to make the highlight more bluish, totally fine with me. It'll still read as brown. As long as the values work. You can see that if I turn my You'll see me occasionally turning my canvas black and white just to check the values, and as long as I see a clear lit, shadow side, and highlight, I'm good. And the same goes for my black hair right here. I'm choosing a much darker gray, and it's going to be more towards violet. So you'll see that my base color is more towards like a cobalt blue, my shadow is more towards ultramarine blue because I like that color shift, and then my highlight will be more towards cobalt blue again, but a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit more saturated, so we can actually see what color temperature the black hair strand is. And I'm going to do one more demo so we can actually just get that all wrapped around our head, so don't worry, I'll probably go a little bit slower in the demo after this. And you'll notice that once we turn this into black and white, it still works because it's all about making sure that the values read, the colors don't matter as much. I remember one of the instructors that I learned from said value is how you see things, color is how you feel about an image. And that just changed my mind forever. So now you might be wondering, okay, we covered the natural hair colors like blonde, ginger, brown, and black, but what about more odd exotic colors like purple or pink or blue? Well, you're gonna basically treat it the same way. And I will start by drawing a nice strand of hair here. So here I have this lovely strand of hair, and I might change the shape as I go on, but that's more in the later phases. I really want to try purple hair, so I am going to choose a kind of a medium purple. So that means not too light, not too dark. So I feel like here is a pretty good area to color this in. So I'm going to use that as my base color. I'm going to change my brush to a more opaque brush, and I'm just going to fill this in, and I'm going to treat this the same way how as I treated, like ginger hair or brown hair or whatever. It just so happens that it just happens to be a different color. So here, I'm just going to fill this all in with my base color, and I use this really hard brush right here because I'm using this as a mask, and I'm going to be painting within this shape here, so I don't want any weird artifacts with a brush texture that has like a bunch of transparency. That's more of a personal preference for me, but you can do whatever you want. So here's my base color. So now this is the part where a lot of people kind of have a deer in headlights look. They're like, okay, I got my base color, but now what? So your next step is to first think about, okay, my value for my shadows is physically going to be darker. So if it helps, physically just move this down straighter. Now, of course, this will work, it's not bad. It's pretty good. It works as a shadow, but I feel like it could be a little bit more interesting than that. So now we can decide, okay, maybe I can make it a little bit more saturated. Maybe that might work a little bit better. Yeah, it could definitely work, but I think we can shift the hue a little bit. So we can either choose a warmer tone for a shadow, like this is just lovely, it works really well, or we can go for more of a cooler shadow, meaning more towards blue. So it really depends on your tastes. Either way, the shadows are going to work because the value is correct. So I really honestly kind of like the cooler blue because I want my base color to be a little bit more on the warmer side, but maybe my shadow will be a little bit more on the cooler side. So I'll make this darker. I'll push it maybe more in a more saturated direction right here, and we'll test it out. And I feel like that works really well. So I'm just going to be marking out all the shadows in here. I'm going to change my brush back to this right here. And if you remember how to shade hair in a grayscale, and we talked about shading ribbons and cylinders, watch that video first if you don't know how to do this. I'm basically treating it as if my light was coming from this direction up here, so that's where my lighting setup is. In fact, I want to draw this in red. So this is my lighting scenario. So now I have my shadows all blocked in. I decided to leave most of this area in shadow, a little bit of this part in light. So now that we have our shadow, we're going to move on to our darker darks. But first, I really want you to see the color shift between the base color and just a shadow alone. So for my base color, you'll notice that my purple is actually more towards like a neutral, almost leaning towards a warm purple. But once I move towards the shadows, you can see that I got a lot more towards blue, which, you know, once again, I talked about color dynamics right there. So that is really interesting. Now, we're going to choose our darker darks. And for me personally, I want to go even cooler. So even more towards blue and just darker. And let's just check how that feels. Yeah, looks pretty good. So I feel like every step is just getting, you know, there's always this kind of dynamic, right? This base color right here is warmer than the shadow right here. And the darker dark is also cooler than the shadow. So it's almost like there's just another layer of color dynamics happening. And for me personally, I just like to add, at this point, I kind of just add in my details or just add in areas of more clarity within the strands. I don't know if I'm going to go super detailed with this, but I'm kind of tempted, to be honest. So I'm just going to add in my darker darks. I'm not going to add it too crazily. I just want to add it in areas where it feels like it would make sense to, like in the darker corners of the hair. Maybe some, I'm going to add a little bit more detail with how the hair twists and turns in the shadows. And I might add a little bit of a gradient down here. And gradients are actually really important for transitions. So you'll notice that if I just had like a flat color right here, it's not going to look as interesting or detailed. But if I just add a simple gradient, just like that, the amount of detail kind of just skyrockets without really having to do anything, which I always think is really interesting and cool. So here I'm going to take my shadow tone and I'm implying a little bit more detail, a little bit more information in the areas of the core shadow, like where the hair is turning away from the light. Usually hair will react with dark, then light, then dark again. So you'll notice that in this part, it's going away from the light, so this will be a lot darker. I'm also going to add some shadow within these smaller strands right here. I can also add in additional strands on the outside just to give it a more of a dynamic silhouette. So you can tell that even in this phase, I'm still changing up the sketch a little bit, but I'm keeping the overall main idea intact. So I'm going to mark out my darker dark right here. Now this could definitely be a little bit darker, but I don't know if I want to go too dark. So I feel like this is good enough for darker dark. And towards the bottom here, I want to add a little bit more description or kind of like a texture down here. So I'm using my shadows and kind of carving out highlights down in here. It's more of a stylistic choice, but you can do whatever you'd like. So the last thing I'm going to add is my highlights. And here's the cool thing. I can literally do whatever I want for the highlights. Let's say I want to make a highlight that is pink. As long as it works value-wise, I've turned this black and white and I added this pink, it'll work in color. Let's do yellow and let's see how that works. That still looks like it can be believable. Let's do, maybe what if we went orange? That could be a really interesting twist. And, let's try teal. Whoa, That's awesome. I mean, like, you could argue that this is like a teal light, and so maybe the green, this is actually more of like a green, not a teal, sorry. And you know, maybe this green is reflecting onto the hair. You could argue for that. Once again, as long as it reads in this grayscale, it works for anything. So I think for my highlight, I'm going to go for more of like a pink, because I think that is super cute and it reads well. So I will use that as long as it reads well as a highlight. You know, I can even choose like a warmer pink like this. I feel like that would be really cute, but it doesn't really feel like a highlight anymore. It feels a little bit too dark. So let me just turn that black and white. Yeah, you can see that it's definitely lighter than my base color, but not so much as a highlight. So what if I tried that? I feel like that works a little bit better. So we'll try that. And I want to make sure that this is on a separate layer as well. So I'm going to mark out my highlights like a blob. Doesn't have to be super fancy because I'm going to chisel it out later. But I place it in one certain area where the light is perpendicular to the surface. So that is where my highlights will be. I can also add a tiny highlight right up here just to show a little bit of bounced light. And then I'm going to take my base color and I'm going to chisel out the edges and just kind of make this highlight feel a little bit better. And I'll show you the cool thing later on, just to show you how much color doesn't matter. It's all about the values. So maybe I will push some of these colors back and forth just a little bit. Maybe apply a little bit more texture in this side, but keep it simple. I think I want to try adding a bit of blue, a blue kind of wash at the bottom, just a very subtle one. Let's see how that looks. I feel like that looks really pretty, but I think it's a little bit too much, so I'm going to make it a little bit more subtle. Like that probably will be good. I also want to add a little bit more detail in the shadows because it doesn't feel very clear right now. And this could be a ponytail, this could be like a strand of hair, this could be I don't know, a tail. This could be a bang, like bangs, part of someone's bangs or something. I feel like that'd be really cool. Honestly, if I had bangs like this, that'd be like the flashiest bangs I've ever had. I'm going to add a little bit more darker darks in this corner right here. Maybe just add a little bit more darkness right down here just to separate out the two strands right here. And personally for me, since this is a pink highlight, I want to add a touch of pink on the edges of the highlight right here. So we have this like nice kind of glow within the highlights. We'll see how that looks. This is going to be kind of rough, but I feel like that works pretty good. And so last but not least, I'm going to add in my highlight color. And let's look at the color palette that we've got. We got this nice pink, and now we move towards purple. You know, definitely very different color shift. Then we're going to go a little bit cooler towards for the shadow, towards blue, and we're going to go even cooler, maybe a little bit more towards blue, a little bit kind of in between purple and blue, and there we got nice colored hair. So now I'm going to show you the cool thing, which is if I pressed Command U and I changed my colors, totally works for pink hair. What if I wanted orange hair? Hey, that looks like orange hair. What if I wanted, you know, like a dark blue hair like this? Totally works, you know, works totally fine. What if I wanted more towards green? Works well. The only thing that I would change is the highlight. But other than that, the values work really well together. Very, very green hair. So if you decide that you don't like this hair color that you chose prior, just change the hue a little bit, change a bit of the highlights and whatever that you need to change, and it'll work just fine because values work. Values is how you see things, color is how you feel about it. So that is it for part 2 of this hair tutorial series. I hope that you found this helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Don't forget to check out the links in our description if you want to learn more about our classes or our books. And I'll see you in the next one.